Kubeadm is a utility which helps you to bring up the complete cluster with a single execution. So this is the Kubeadm link. You can refer that. So we are going to see how to bring up the complete Kubernetes cluster with the Kubeadm method. Here we will be using our Weave network for it. Okay, how to install and configure the Weave network. That's what we are going to do. Okay, so first let me see how the Kubeadm method of installation is working on the cluster. Great. So in the master, first I'm going to remove the older packages which are all installed in our previous lab. The reason why I'm doing that is I'm going to use a different repo now to install the Kubernetes so that it will get the latest repository. Till now we were using the yum default repository to install the Kubernetes. Okay, but here I'm going to use a specific repository to download the Kubeadm, so that will have the latest available version. So I don't want it to conflict with the previous one. So from the master, I am going to remove the etcd and the Kubernetes components which I installed yesterday. So let's first do that. So let me remove the etcd and kubestar. So any packages with the Kubernetes, starting with Kubernetes, I'm going to remove it. So let me run this. Kubernetes client master remove. Yeah, this is fine. So let me run this command. So this will uninstall the etcd and the Kubernetes packages which were installed during the manual method. So the next thing I'm going to do is, so for the Kubeadm method, okay, so the another advantage in Kubeadm method is, okay, it will be bringing up all the services as a containers. Like for example, in the master we have seen multiple components, right? Like we have our API server, scheduler, control manager, proxy, all those things are going to come in as a container itself. Okay, so for that it will be interacting with some of the kernel modules. Okay, so there is a SC Linux concept in CentOS, that is secure Linux. So that will basically not allow my Kubeadm to interact with some of the kernel modules. So for that I'm going to disable SC Linux on this cluster. Okay, so let me see that. Let me see how to do that. So in the master, so the SC Linux configuration, you can see it in the etc SC Linux config. So you can see the SC Linux is set in the enforcing state. I actually need to change it to disabled. So I'm just going to run a set command. So basically it's a serial editor command which will find and replace SC Linux is equal to disabled. So once I run this command, so if I read the file, I can see now it is updated to disabled. Now to make this configuration into effect, I need to restart the machine. So let me restart it. So the command to restart a server in Linux is init 6. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new repo, okay, which is going to point to the Google to download the latest Kubeadm version. So I'm going to create etc yum.repos.d kubernetes.repo. So this is going to be my content. Once you added this, I basically need to install the Kubeadm and Docker. So let me install yum install Kubeadm and Docker. So once you added this, You should be with this. So Docker is already installed, so we don't need to worry about it. So it will just install the Kubeadm and the dependent packages. After the installation, let me start the Docker and enable the Docker, and I'm going to start and enable the kubelet because I need the kubelet to be running on those machines so that it will be able to communicate to the API server, which is going to run as a container. Okay, so I want both kubelet and the Docker services to be started and enabled. So let me do that. So let me start the kubelet and Docker service. So sysdm ctl Docker systemctl Docker, and then systemctl start kubelet. Systemctl enable. Once these two are done, my mission is ready for initializing the cluster. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize the cluster using the Kubeadm command. Okay, so the command is Kubeadm init. So what it is going to do, okay, I may have this issue. Yeah, because I already have values in etcd. Let me remove that. rm-rf. Let me remove the content of the etcd directory. And then let me run the Kubeadm init. So this is going to download all the Docker images like API server image, proxy image, this scheduler image, all those images. It will download it from internet. Okay, and then it will run those containers and then configure it for me. Okay, let's wait for it to complete. Once the image is pulled, okay, you can see that it is generating a certificate. Okay, I told you, like in the manual method, we haven't generated the certificate and key and all those steps. So it automatically does everything for you. Okay, so it is creating a certificate and key for every components. Okay, and then it is defining health checks. Okay, and it is writing the configuration file for me. Instead of me going and modify the configuration file, it is creating that. Okay, and it is going to create the pods for it. Okay, and I will get a output like this. Okay, you please take a copy of this content. This we will be using further to connect to the cluster. Okay, so just copy this. Your Kubernetes control plane has been initiated successfully till the Kubeadm join command. Okay, I'll talk about that, what these files are all about. Okay, so let me copy and paste it on a notepad. There, as I have the certificates and authentication enabled to the cluster now, I will not be directly communicate to the cluster. I need to have a config file which is going to have a connecting information and credentials to connect to the cluster. So basically, in the manual method, we haven't enabled authentication and all those stuffs, but Kubeadm is going to bring the cluster with the authentication and role-based access control and all those stuffs. Okay, so to connect to that, I need a configuration file which is going to have my SSL key pair. Kubernetes uses a SSL-based authentication, so there will be a configuration file which will be generated, and this is the default location of the configuration file. Using the configuration file only, I'll be able to communicate to the cluster. Okay, this step talks about how to take the configuration file and use it for your kubectl command. Okay, and the next thing is, it is going to talk about you need to deploy a network container, that is network provider, you need to install it. We'll talk about that later. And then it is going to provide me a join command. So whenever I want to add a node to this cluster, I will be running this command on the node. In the slave nodes, I will be running this command. Through this command, it will communicate to the master. So these are all the important information it is having. So just copy paste it in a notepad and we will use that. Coming back to this, so this machine is a raw machine. I don't have any containers or any images running. Let me show you what are all the images it has downloaded. So that, let me just issue the Docker images command. I can see it has downloaded the image for my API server. Sorry, control manager, scheduler, proxy, and then core DNS. Okay, core DNS is one more additional service which comes with Kubernetes. So imagine in your Kubernetes cluster, you'll be bringing up an application, and when a container wants to communicate to the another container internally, you will not be able to manage it with the IP address, right? So whenever you do a deployment, the pod IP will be changing. Okay, for that, Kubernetes provides an internal DNS service, and you will be able to get a domain name, DNS name for all the containers or services which are coming up. Okay, so that is managed inside the core DNS service. So that is what this core DNS is all about. And we have the etcd. If I do a Docker PS on the master, I can see this many containers are running. These are all the actual this component containers, and there will be a pass container which will be brought in with the container. These are the sidecars which are injected with the main containers. Okay, so my Kubernetes cluster or my master is up actually. So then to communicate to the cluster, I told that the configuration file is needed. Let me just show you the content of the configuration file. So this will be the content of the configuration file. So this is going to have my it has the API version of the Kubernetes, and then what is the cluster certificate authority, okay, and what IP, on what port number the API is listening, okay, under which user I should be able to communicate to that. So the username is Kubernetes admin, okay, and for the admin I will have the certificate, SSL certificate, client key data, and the client key certificate to get authenticated. Okay, so these are all the informations that will be there. And whenever I run a kubectl command, kubectl will look out for this configuration file in the user's home directory. Okay, and it should be in a folder called .kube, and the file name should be config. So that's what this command is saying. So copy the, so in the home directory of the user, create a .kube directory, and then copy the admin configuration as a file name as config. Okay, this is common for both Windows and Linux. Okay, so wherever you use the kubectl command, it is going to look for the configuration file in the location where under user home directory, there should be a folder with the name .kube, and inside that the file name should be config. Okay, and we are going to configure this on the Windows machine. I'll show you how it is done. Okay, and I'm just changing the file ownership. So let me run these 3 commands to see whether I'm getting a response from my Kubernetes. Okay, so first let me create a .kube directory. Okay, so now I'm copying the configuration file, and then I'm copying the configuration file here. Let me change the ownership of the config file. So once it is done, if you run the command kubectl, so yesterday itself we used the command kubectl is the client which you use to communicate to the Kubernetes cluster. So kubectl get nodes will list all the nodes which are connected to the cluster. So kubectl get nodes will list all the nodes which are connected to the cluster. In this cluster, I have only one mission, that is my master, right? And you see, it is in a not ready state because till now I haven't configured any network providers for it. So that's why it is in the not ready state. So the next step we are going to do is we are going to install the Weave network on the cluster, and after that this master will come into the ready state. So let me know once everyone completed till this, then we will start installing the Weave network.
Yes.
Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to install a Weave network. So basically, I have a YAML file. Okay, just a moment. Let me just show you the YAML file first, and then I will apply this. So kubectl version. It was. This is the YAML file which I will be downloading. So this is the YAML file. So basically, so all these instructions were written in a YAML format. So it is going to create a first it is going to create a service network so that my Weave component will be able to communicate to the cluster. So it will create a user account, and for the user account, Kubernetes creates a role-based access control. So it is going to create a role for it, cluster role, there it will be given what are all the resources, what kind of access it can have. So these are all the things it's going to have. Then it will map the role to the user, right? This is called the role binding. And then it is going to, role binding is happening here. And next it is going to create a daemon set. Okay, daemon set is a kind of resource in Kubernetes. Okay, we'll see in detail when we bring up the dashboard, but as of now, think of it like whenever a node comes into the cluster, I want this Weave network to be running there, right? So that is what daemon set does. When you define a particular container as a daemon set, it is going to ensure that any new node added to the cluster, that the container will be running on that particular node. Okay, that is what daemon set is all about. So it is going to create a daemon set for my Weave, and these are all the Weave network pod information. Yeah, so these are all the components it's going to create. Okay, so normally when you want to apply these instructions, okay, to a Kubernetes cluster, we will be using a concept called kubectl apply. Okay, kubectl apply -f, and the file which I showed you is available on a particular URL. So that's what I'm going to give here. So when I run this from the internet, it will download the YAML file which I showed you now. So this will be the location of the YAML file, and I'm going to apply this on the Kubernetes cluster. So this will install the Weave network, all those things I showed, right? It has created a service account, it has created a cluster role and did a cluster role binding, and then it has created another role, and then role binding was done, and it is created as a daemon set. So the Weave network installation is given as a Kubernetes deployment itself. So now if I see after running this, if I run the kubectl get nodes, you can see it is coming into the ready state. Previously, it was in a not ready state. After I deploy the network configuration, it is coming into the ready state. So my master is ready. Now I'm going to add a node to the master. Let's prepare the node for it. Okay. Now I'm going into my node server, and there I'm going to do the similar activity. So let me give this. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the SC Linux with the same set command. And then let me restart the server. Hit 6. And then I'm going to add the same yum repo. So the same content. If you have any content, please delete the existing content and override with the content which I'm sharing in the Slack. And then same thing, yum installed Kubeadm and Docker. So ensure that it is installing Kubeadm. When you run the command, you should have minimum 12 packages getting installed. So coming back to the node, in the node we have installed the Kubeadm and things, and let me start and enable the Docker, and I need to start and enable the kubelet. So once it is done, we have copied a Kubeadm join command. Remember, once the cluster is initialized, we have a Kubeadm join command. Just run the command on the node. So the command which we got from the Kubeadm init, just run it. So it will prepare everything and connect to the master. So once it is joined, you will get a message like this node has joined the cluster. Okay. Now, if I come back to the master and run the kubectl get nodes, I can see 2 missions in the ready state. So like this, with the Kubeadm join command, you can join any number of nodes to this cluster. This is one of the easiest method to set up the cluster. And in this, you can join any number of nodes to the cluster using the join command.